If you are wanting to achieve fine detail in your artwork, like what I've achieved in this portrait, and you can see there's some lovely fine brushwork in there, lots of detail, and the face is super smooth. And of course also something like this pet portrait where there's a lot of hair and a lot of detail. If you want to achieve that kind of detail in your work, you really do need to be working on a smooth canvas. Now you can purchase these fine detail cotton canvases or a fine detailed linen canvas, but they are very, very expensive. Now you can pick up these very, very cheap canvases or very cheap canvas boards. I've picked these up from Amazon and they were very, very inexpensive. Now straight out of the packaging, these do feel quite rough and you're not really able to get the fine detail that I want to be able to get in my portraits and my pet portraits. So the solution to that is to actually gesso your canvas. And in this video, I'm going to show you my processes for gessoing the canvases so you can end up with a really smooth canvas board or stretch canvas that you're able to get some fine detail on. Okay, so I'm in the process of gessoing several canvases. I like to batch my canvas gessoing process. I usually do quite a few at a time, and then I've got them all ready for when I'm feeling inspired. I know I've got canvases all prepared and ready. Now I want to demonstrate, I'm going to demonstrate this particular canvas board in its entirety from start to finish, but normally I would do a batch of them at the same time, but I'll just work on this one so you can see the entire processes. Now this is a relatively cheap canvas board that I have bought from Amazon. It's already primed, so technically you don't need to pre-prime this. You can paint directly on them, but there is a little bit of texture to these. So I'm just going to take this out of its wrapper so you can see I'm working on one straight out of the packaging. Now there is a little bit of texture on here which is fine, but it's not exactly what I want for doing finer details. I find that 2 to 3 coats of gesso will give me a much smoother surface. Now here's an example. This is an acrylic painting that I've done recently, and again it is on the same canvas board. As you can see, it's on exactly the same canvas boards that we've been using. But I have, of course, just primed it beforehand, so I'm able to get some lovely smooth details on there. And that's just my personal preference. I prefer to have less of a texture, particularly when I'm doing portraits or pet portraits. Of course, if you are a landscape painter and you prefer a little texture, then you don't need to prime this at all. So I'm going to start from the beginning. Like I said, I tend to give it 2 and sometimes 3 coats, depending on the surface. You will need your gesso. The brand doesn't matter. I prefer the slightly thicker gesso. But again, use whatever you prefer to use. You will also need a sanding block. Now this is one of those that you can wash. I quite like these because you can just wash them and reuse them lots of times. Now normally I would be sort of allowing this to dry between layers. Certainly at least the last layer, I'd usually leave it overnight. But for this demonstration purposes, I'm going to be drying this one off with the hairdryer so you can see all 3 stages. And again, as you can see from here, I'm normally working on several at the same time. So I'll do 1 layer on them all, then do the sanding, then 2 layers on them all, then do the sanding, and so on. But again, like I said, I'll work on this one in its entirety. I will take a little bit of the gesso on the sponge. These are the decorator sponges, and simply just go up and down this. You also want to make sure you've got some covering for your surface. This job can get quite messy, and probably better to wear gloves. I like to make sure everything's covered. You can either do that or little circles, pushing that gesso into the weave of the canvas. Once I've done that, I will smooth that out as best I can. removing any little bumps that you see. And I'll go the other way. I'm very, very light at this stage. Now again, you have a choice. If you were batch doing these, you could probably just leave them for an hour or so, do a load and leave them all for an hour or so. I'm going to rush this along with the hairdryer so I can get the next layer on. Once your first layer is nice and dry, you're going to take your sanding block, and you want to do this lightly. The idea is not to scrub, but you're going to gently rub over the surface of the canvas to remove any bumps that are there. Very light pressure. Once you've done that, you can get rid of all your dust. And we're ready now for round 2. Those final strokes need to be super, super light to get this as smooth as you possibly can. Once again, I'm going to speed this along by drying this with the hairdryer. Once that's nice and dry, we're going to begin again with our sanding block. Again, very, very lightly, with the aim just to remove some of those surface bumps. Get rid of that dust, and we will begin a third layer. Now you could stop at just 2 layers. Quite often I'll find that this is enough, but I'm going to go ahead and put 3 layers on this one. Now normally I would leave these overnight, but once again I am going to speed things off with the hairdryer. And then of course we're going to give it one last final sand, very, very, very lightly, not to remove any of the gesso that you've put down, but just to remove any surface bumps. Again, removing the dust. Now once I've done my 3 coats and I've got a lovely smooth surface to work on, I always like to label these on the back so I know exactly what I have done with them. So this one has had 3 coats of gesso, 3 times G. And then I know that that's had 3 coats of gesso. So this is now a lovely smooth surface for painting on. And in comparison to one that's straight out of the packet, apart from the fact that you've got this beautiful white surface, I'm not sure if the camera will pick this up, but this is much more bumpier and this one is much smoother. Once you have done all your gessoing, it is very, very important that you leave this for a minimum of 3 days for the gesso to actually cure. My personal recommendation is to leave it for a week before painting on. The gesso, even though it's dry to the touch, will not be cured to the surface, and you really do need to allow that to cure fully. And because we've got 3 layers on there, I really want to make sure that that's lovely and cured, so I will leave that for a minimum of a week before painting on. I do these in batches, so I've always got plenty to start on that have been sat there for weeks and months even, because I do so many at any one time. So I hope you found this video helpful and it's given you some idea how to gesso a surface. This method will apply whether you are using a canvas board like I am, or whether you're using stretch canvases or MDF panels. The process will be exactly the same. Personally, a minimum of 2 coats of gesso is needed, and I do often quite like having 3 for an extra smooth surface. Remember, when you are sanding, don't rub too hard. You're only aiming to gently sand and remove the surface bumps. So I hope you found this video helpful. I really do hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and if you have, remember to hit that like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.